Hello and welcome to another edition of the European Report. Here we are in the European Parliament, and in today's programme we'll be discussing the published EU guidelines and asking what do these EU guidelines mean in terms of possible economic sanctions facing Israel with goods and services that are produced in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria and also the Golan Heights. And we're also asking what can the European Union do in terms of the recent rise in violence that we're seeing in Israel today. And in today's programme I'm joined by Jotan Wassenberg, who is the Deputy Head of the European Parliament Relations and representing the Israeli government, and also Bas Belder, a very prominent MEP from the Netherlands, and Thomas Sandel, the founder and director of the European Coalition for Israel. So gentlemen, welcome to the programme. I'll start off with you, Bas. It's great to have you back on the programme, and we all commend you for the incredible work that you do on behalf of Israel. But can you share with us some of your recent activities in which you've been able to do here in the European Parliament on behalf of Israel?
Yeah, this week was especially a busy week. We had two conferences with excellent contributions of Dr. Einat Wilf, a former permanent member of the Knesset, and her message was quite clear to us. You have Holocaust denial, you're totally against it, but you should also totally against Zionism denial. That means that when we speak here on the two-state solution, that means two states for two nations, and to go totally contrary the mindset of Mahmoud Abbas and the like on the Palestinian side that don't recognize a Jewish state. And that was a clear message, and I hope that nowadays the European institutions will be hard and will be clear to Mahmoud Abbas and the like that will there be a real peace process, will there be real negotiations. Both partners should be clear on their intentions, and that means two states for two nations, and it's still not the case, and that is the foundation for any negotiation that means something.
And Thomas, it's great to be back with you again. Maybe you can share with our viewers particularly some of the work that you've been doing recently on behalf of ECI.
Well, thank you, Simon. It's always good to be back on the program. And obviously the issues that we'll be speaking about today in the program are also issues that we've had reasons to work on very, very intensively over the last few weeks. Both when it comes to the rise of violence in Israel and what do we expect from the European institutions as a response to that, but also even more acutely the labeling issue, which we will come back to, I understand, later in the program.
Excellent. And Jonathan, it's great to have you on the program, so we offer you a warm welcome on the European Report. It's always good to have an Israeli diplomat on the program. So can you share with us a little bit of the focus of the Israeli mission to the EU currently?
First of all, thank you for inviting me to the program. For me, it's an honor to be here. From our point of view, the main thing is to send the message to the EU that we are the same. We share the same values. We are the same family, and we have the same fights and challenges. This is the main message, and I think that we have to treat one another accordingly.
Jonathan, as of this day that we're actually recording this programme, the EU has published now its EU guidelines regarding labelling Israeli products and services produced in Judea and Samaria, East Jerusalem and the Golan Heights. What is your interpretation of what's being published, and what are the consequences for Israel in terms of its relationship with the EU and the peace process?
We see it we are very disappointed of the labeling. We see it as an act of singling out Israel, and it's an act of discrimination against Israel. There are a lot of conflicts, more than 200 around the world, and the EU picked up our conflict and pointed the finger at us. And again, this is something which members of the same family don't do to one another. We share the same things, we share the same values, we are democracy, we are facing tough challenges in the region, and we think also that the EU, of course, is affected by the same challenges, and we are ready to cooperate with the EU and to act together with the EU and to fight the same battles. So from our point of view, it's a huge disappointment, and of course it will have consequences on the relations between Israel and the EU.
And Thomas, I want to bring you on board on this one because you've been working very, very hard on this issue now for a couple of years. What does this mean in terms of EU-Israeli relations, but also what does this practically mean with the publicisation of the EU guidelines known as the labelling on goods and produce produced in Judea and Samaria, East Jerusalem, or even the Golan Heights, which includes Israel's winery?
Yeah. No, I think it's a dark day in the history of the European Union today. Therefore, I feel privileged to be on the program and to be together with the representative of the government of Israel and together with good friend Baz to illustrate that this is not in the interest of European citizens. Israel has solid support in Europe, and this is one expression of it, us coming here week and speak with our MEPs and explain exactly what Jonathan said, that we are part of the same families. It should be crystal clear who our allies are in the Middle East. We shouldn't weaken, we shouldn't undermine our friends in the Middle East at such a critical time as we are living in. Consequences. I believe this is first step on the slippery slope back to a very dark chapter in European history, where we again have reasons to label products as being Jewish and indicate, because it's a clear indication to say morally we should be careful, we shouldn't buy these products. Everything else is incorrect, everything else is a lie. There is a political reason, there's nothing technical about these guidelines. And it is giving in to some of the most darkest fringe groups in European society that are calling for a complete boycott of Israel, that are calling Israel illegitimate, calling Israel an apartheid state. And the European Union should be an institution that should be a bulwark against this type of extremism and not promote it.
Yeah. Also, Bas, the timing of these announcements regarding the publicisation of these EU guidelines, also the labelling of Israeli products, doesn't this actually encourage more Palestinian violence at this time? Because what it seems to be doing is rewarding the Palestinians and Israel's getting nothing back in return. And isn't this the implementation of the entire BDS movement, the boycott, divestment, sanctions, as a matter of European policy against Israel?
Let me say first that Thomas said it's a dark day. I can say I totally support the position of the Israeli government. Totally support it. It hurts me personally. But because I also underlines that we are one family. You can speak about ill timing. That is an understatement for when we are looking at what is happening with ordinary Israeli civilians, with all these stabbings and also violence, Palestinian violence and incitement. You are totally without any feeling when you are doing that, precisely at this time. But this is the context. Also, without this context, it is in contradiction to the interest of the Palestinian people. I was recently in Judea, Samaria, and saw, for example, the supermarket shops of Rami Levy, and I spoke with the Palestinians there. So they are hurting the Palestinian people. They are hurting our relationship between the European Union and Israel. and there is totally no excuse for it, and the way lays open for more actions against Israel, because I was in the Foreign Affairs Committee, and what I learned from especially the colleagues from the left and the further left was only hatred speech against, and really calls upon the European Commission to go further, to postpone or freeze the association agreement. So, and it is you can't understand it by your normal brains. So it is very dark. It is an attitude that also, I think, frightens the Jewish diaspora in Europe. And I must say, I was reading yesterday a Dutch lady, a scholar. She lives in Rehovot in Israel. And she said, it was for me saddening and totally realistic, we should also have it in our minds that she spoke about, she wrote about all this violence, that 4 soldiers of the IDF were attacked by a car, and she said, and that was for me, said a lot, she said, no mail, no phone from the Netherlands, we should cope with all this violence on ourselves alone. And therefore it is very good, excellent that we have this program, for there are real people that are real friends of Israel. For that was Einat Wil was also saying, how is it possible that such rulings, such steps from the European Union done by friends of Israel, between commas, that are false friends. Yeah. They should be honest. Who is the force behind this totally antagonistic step, that you are uprooting the European-Israeli cooperation that is so immensely fruitful for our interests. They are against their own interest, and that is, I think, that is deepening our sadness about it. That absolutely. It is not only when interests don't count, then it is sheer revulsion, hatred to a state, and then you are in the same line as all these people that don't want any Jewish state in the Middle East. Then you are on the side of Iran, of Hamas, yes. And so on.
Of course. Just want to bring Jonathan into this one. I mean, Jonathan, if with the publicisation of these guidelines, does this mean now that individual member states of the European Union will adopt it? And practically, what does this mean for Israel?
Well, from our point of view, it's a clear message that the EU is taking a side in the conflict between us and the Palestinians, and of course with the Palestinian side. And if the EU, in this point of time in which we are trying to relaunch the negotiations with the Palestinians, is picking a side, then what will be the effect of the role of the EU in the Middle East peace process? In the European Parliament, there was a resolution just a month or almost a month ago in September about the role of the EU. Is this the role that the EU wants, to pick a side and have a big question mark on its own contribution to peace?
And our amendment, our amendment on two states for 2 nations, 2 peoples, was rejected by the majority. What about the 2 states? How can you be a broker in the Middle East process that is stressful for the Israelis?
No, absolutely. And Thomas, I know that you want to come on this one.
No, I just wanted to point out, talking about timing, nothing could be more ironic that this happened one day after the 77th anniversary of Kristallnacht. I mean, how unsensitive can you be? Are you trying to underscore a point, or it's a disgrace?
Yes. No, so double insensitivity. double, having no regard to inner feelings of the Jewish people. With Kaufnik by Juden, what happened during the 30s in Germany, and also with all this violence, with all these victims on the Jewish side.
Absolutely.
And this, if I may add, it's also 40 years to the day in which the UN decided that Zionism is a form of racism, which was a huge decision that changed our relations with the UN and brought the UN to the position in which it is today of being very one-sided. So is this the path that the EU wants to take?
And Jonathan, what would this mean in terms of EU-Israeli relations? And how will you fight these published EU guidelines?
Well, we had today a very clear message, both from our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and also from our Prime Minister. We have also clear messages from the United States, from prominent congressmen and senators that they don't understand how this decision was made in general and in this point of time.
They have a warning.
And they have a warning also to the EU and to the relations between the US and the EU.
So negotiations on the trade
and the TTIP, of course. So from our point of view, I won't enter now into specifics of what we will do. I can tell you that in the short run, we already called the EU ambassador in Israel to a discussion in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to express our disappointment and to use harsh words to portray what this labeling decision has created in the relations between us and the EU. And we also have the march to the EU institutions here in Brussels. So this is in the short run. I can tell you that there will be other steps also in the future.
And Thomas, isn't this really implementation of the whole entire BDS movement, the boycott, divestments and sanctions? And if so, how is this going to help reconcile Israelis and Palestinians when it's actually going to hurt the Palestinians more who are actually employed by an Israeli workforce? And take a classic example with SodaStream, very successful Israeli company who employed so many Palestinian workers who were getting 3 or 4 times the salaries they would than their Arab counterparts in the same area working with that company. And now, because of the proposed EU guidelines, which are now being published, they've had to move into closer to Tel Aviv to ensure that they don't face economic sanctions. Surely Europe's going in the wrong direction, is it not?
Yeah, we issued a press release yesterday where we made a couple of points. One being that the success story, if you wish, of European integration is exactly the opposite. That was to bring together, previous foes, enemies, to cooperate. And cooperate specifically in terms of industry and business. Here we are going completely in a different direction. We are trying to separate. So what the EU is doing, in fact, is to saying there should be a separation. It doesn't matter if tens of thousands of Palestinians have their livelihood in being employed by Israeli companies. We want to separate them. And I think it doesn't take much brain power to see that what the EU should do and the international community should do is to create opportunities for Israelis and Palestinians to work together, to play together, to engage together. And business is probably one of the most powerful forces in really bringing people together and can be done so for the common good. So this goes in contradiction, I think, to all the logic between European integration, between the European peace project. And it will, as Jonathan says, it will have very counterproductive consequences.
And Bas, how do we fight this? I mean, here you're one of the most pro-Israel MEPs here in the European Parliament. What is your reaction to this, and how do you plan to fight against this, and how can our viewers across Europe respond to the published EU guidelines?
Next week I will be with the Israel delegation of the European Parliament in the Knesset. Then we will speak with them, and I hope that we will have a joint, not a solution, but a joint act that we should battle against it, that we should strengthen our relations, that we also should more invite representatives of the civil society of the government of Israel that will be learned here in the debate, for that is missing. The whole Iran issue was without any essential political and scholarly input from Israel, and that is also for the business. So what we should do is on the ground in my country, but also on the European level, that we should promote all the commercial and all the scholarly contacts between the EU and Israel. And for that is the issue, of course, that we should have normal and friendly contacts and bonds. It is, as said, it is a member of our family. You don't treat a member of your family. So, but you know, families have several members, and we should try that to evade that the cleavage that it is now will broaden, and we should do with our personal contacts and with the personal input here of the MEPs counteract this. I think it is totally shameful and counterproductive. We have in Dutch schande en schadelijk. That is against your own interest. And we should fight against it, but in the proper way. Absolutely. And that is more contacts, more joint operations, more listening to the real security interest of the State of Israel. But that are also our interests. So you can comprehend that I don't comprehend the German position in the nuclear deal.
No,
how can
absolutely.
you do that?
And Thomas, how can we fight against these published EU guidelines?
There are two aspects, if I understand it correctly. One is, of course, there are guidelines. They need to be implemented on a member state level. That means that the battle, if you wish, goes back to 28 member states. Yep. So I think that we, as Friends of Israel, should be very visible, very loud in our national capitals to say this is unacceptable. Absolutely. Our government should not apply these guidelines, full stop. And because we know in the Council it did not have the support of all EU member states. So I think if some member states would go out now and make a case and say, well, our country will not apply these guidelines, that could have a ripple effect. Secondly, I think on a consumer level, you know, you and I and Friends of Israel can proactively make sure that we buy more Israeli products, and especially these products that they want to label. I think it should be a pride of every Friend of Israel to look for Jewish products which are labeled Jewish and say, well, you know, there should be a counter campaign to say, let's buy this, this, even if we don't like, I don't know what it is, you know, some you know, what makes you cosmetics, but I'd be happy to go and buy some female cosmetics just for the sake of proving my point.
Absolutely. And Jonathan, I really want to bring you in here. You know, what can our viewers do in response? I just want to say that Israel's not alone on this one. You have friends here in the European Parliament and also in the media as well. How can we fight against these published EU guidelines?
First of all, we appreciate it very much, the fact that our friends are with us and beside us and are supportive. This is something that is not only important for us as diplomats in the EU countries, but also to the people of Israel, in Israel, that are looking at the TV and the messages from certain TV stations in Europe that are very anti-Israeli. So it's important to hear also the voice of our friends, and we appreciate it a lot. We can fight it again in the member states as suggested, and also in action and in buying certain products, and in also being vocal vis-a-vis the relevant authorities in each country and expressing the views against labeling.
Yeah, And Thomas, we have probably less than about a minute and a half to the program. You know, apart from buying Israeli goods such as Israeli dates or Israeli hummus or avocados, it's important as well that we write to our MEPs, isn't it, as well as the European Commission.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is, if we have never before written a letter to a member of national parliament or European Parliament or the European Commission, this is the time to do it. And I think the point is very simple, to say, well, we don't accept this going back into our dark future. We want to engage with Israel. Israel are our friends. We're part of the same family. We should support Israel.
No, absolutely.
If I may add, there is, for example, a petition committee here in the European Parliament. If some organizations, people that appreciate Israel, love Israel, write to a petition, it's something that resonates also in the European Parliament. It's very important.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me on today's programme. And I just want to thank you all for watching today's programme. We've heard that the EU has published the EU guidelines, which means that Israeli products and produce that is produced in either Judea, Samaria, East Jerusalem, or the Golan Heights, which is famous for Israel's famous winery, we can all play a part in saying that this does nothing for the peace process. This does nothing to strengthen relations between the EU and Israel, and this is why they have to be fought. So therefore, you have a responsibility, a moral responsibility, to act and to write to your MP, including the European Commission, as well as your representatives in your parliaments, to take action. Now is not the time to be silent, but now is the time to make your voice heard. So thank you for joining us on today's European Report. Hello and welcome to the European Report. Here we are in the European Parliament, which is in the heart of the European Union. And in today's programme, we're going to be discussing the wave of terrorism and violence that we're seeing in Israel today, and looking at the issue of incitement, particularly used by Palestinian media and that of social media, in instigating this terrorism and violence that we're seeing in Israel today. And in today's programme, I'm joined by Thomas Sandel, the founder and director of the European Coalition for Israel, Bas Belder, MEP for the Netherlands and a very strong, powerful campaigner on behalf of Israel, and also Jotan Wassenweg, the deputy head of the European Parliament's relations. So, gentlemen, welcome to the programme. Firstly, I'm going to start off with you, Thomas. The security situation we've seen in Israel and in Jerusalem, particularly during the months of October and November, have been sadly incredibly depressing, and the security situation has deteriorated. In October alone, there's been 13 Israelis that have been murdered, with over 70 injured in knife attacks in the current wave of Palestinian terrorism and violence. What is your assessment of the current security situation facing Israel today?
I mean, sadly, what we saw happening or starting in September is just continuing, and it doesn't seem to stop, and or it may not even have reached its peak. So of course it should be a great concern for anyone, not just in Israel but in Europe. And I think, you know, in this house, in this European Parliament, people often react when they see terrorist attacks in Paris, in Toulouse, in Brussels, in Copenhagen. It shouldn't be any different if it happens in Jerusalem, if it happens in Israel. And I think, you know, for each time, starting with the president of this parliament, there should be a clear condemnation, and there should be a clear message also to those who are inciting to violence, to say, and it's not only symbolic. See, the European Union can really stop this violence if they cut off the funding, or if they make the funding conditional on certain standards. And here we should really put the European institutions to accountability to do the only right thing.
And Bas, I've got some figures here from the Israeli Foreign Ministry. and I'm just going to read it out to our viewers. And this says that since the beginning of the current wave of terror attacks, 11 Israelis have been killed, 145 people injured, 18 of them seriously, 72 people were treated for anxiety, and the IDF by terror, that there's been 58 stabbing attacks on the IDF, 5 shootings and 6 vehicle attacks, and more than 60 terrorists have been killed whilst attacking Israelis. What is your response to this current wave of terrorism, and why are we seeing such little international condemnation of these attacks, particularly coming out of the EU?
Yes, let me first say that I'm closely following what is happening, and also I take the time to look at carefully what is by cartoons and by video messages done to promote this sheer violence, these sheer acts of terrorism. And I cannot comprehend that there is not an outcry from the European side, that there are not really sanctions against all these incitements on the Palestinian side. And also what you are seeing, the sermons in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and what that is said about the Jewish people, the Jewish state, it is. Therefore, I cannot comprehend that this is not a real outcry. Is it happening on the planet? Are there not human people? That couple in the brightness of their life with their 4 children that were liquidated, and I cannot comprehend. I must say, I can only one thing say, that I'm as a Christian, I feel really it is hurting my heart. And I have the responsibility to speak out that we should not only condemn this terrorism, but also we should act and punish the forces behind this terrorism, and that people that have a responsible post in the Palestinian Authority.
No, absolutely. And Yotan, I mean, our hearts go out to Israel, to your citizens of your country, facing this unprecedented wave of knife attacks, which are absolutely horrific. Can you share with us the magnitude of the security situation that Israel faced today, and particularly what is Israel doing in response to this knife attacks and terror attacks?
First of all, we appreciate any act of solidarity with Israel. We, as my colleagues here mentioned, we lack a clear condemnation from the EU against these terror attacks. Not only in Jerusalem, we shouldn't forget Hamas in Gaza that fires at least once or twice a week a rocket at Israeli villages near the border with Gaza. I can say that the situation now is very tense. My friends in Jerusalem, my friends in Tel Aviv are feeling the tension. They are afraid to send their kids to the kindergarten. There are a lot of false, because of the tension, a lot of false callings of attacks or possible attacks, because people are live in fear. But we are strong in the sense that we are ready to fight terrorism, and we, together with, of course, the IDF, as specific when it has specific information, acts against terror cells in Judea and Samaria, and of course in Gaza when necessary. So we are ready to fight the terrorists, and we are calling on the international community to say loud and clear that these are terror attacks, and Israel has the right to defend itself.
Absolutely.
It has nothing to do with so-called resistance. That is the slogan.
Yeah.
But we shouldn't forget the incitement from the Palestinian Authority itself.
Yes, Mahmoud Abbas.
Exactly.
Already in September.
And Thomas, considering that the EU is such a huge financer in terms of the Palestinian Authority, can't the EU be a little bit more proactive in actually identifying where money is being spent and saying, look, we will stop your funding unless you stop this terror? Is there more international pressure that can be placed upon Western governments, and particularly European taxpayers in particular, about where our money is being spent to stop this incitement to terror and encouragement of violence that we're seeing by Palestinians against Israelis today?
Yes, absolutely. And see, often we sit in this studio or we say in this house that European Union is limited because the EU doesn't have a military power, so there are limitations to what the EU can achieve. Here it's very clear. It's very clear. The European Union together has enormous economical power in the region, and in particular when it comes to the Palestinian Authority. If there's anybody, any institution in the world that can change the landscape overnight, it is here. It is here in this very house. And that means that the responsibility lays with the European institutions and nowhere else. But obviously also here, you know, we as Friends of Israel, we need to take our responsibility to speak up, to raise this point, which has been done, and it should be pointed out. There's been a number of petitions here. There's been clear evidence how money is spent not in line with the recommendations. And still, as when Mahmoud Abbas was here some 2 weeks ago and met with Federica Mogherini, there was no mentioning whatsoever of the real problems in the region. And I believe there is a clear lack of clarity, of moral clarity, that is coming out of these institutions.
Yeah. And Bas, I mean, it's sad to think that now an entire generation of young Palestinians have been fed daily the incitement against Israel, incitement against Jewish people to actually hate them through their media, through their education system. And now the internet, particularly social media such as Facebook, has been used to encourage young Palestinians to take up knives and stab Israelis, including Palestinian women. And we've seen horrendous videos of this taking place. Surely more can be done to stop these internet companies from allowing, particularly like Facebook, the incitement, because surely this is actually bringing the reputation of a social media organisation and company like Facebook into disrepute.
Yeah, I totally agree. When you see the latest issue is so what, and all poisonous acts of poisoned minds are shown. Because of I want to be updated with the present. I had to look, but it is shattering for me that. It is total spiritual poisoning what has happened, what is taking place. I've been for 1 year ago in a prison with all these young Palestinian people, and what are the prospects? What is the future? What is the future? And that should comes to the mind of the Europeans. When they are willing and they are full of peace and dialogue and so on, and nothing to say about all this incitement, all this violence. A whole generation is growing up, and also, let us be honest, the Islamist hatred to the total of Western civilization, if you are religious or secular. So what you are doing, they are by not reacting, is capitulating for these very dark, I must say, satanic forces.
Absolutely. And Jonathan as well. I mean, there are great organisations like Palestinian Media Watch and Memory who watch and translate and bring the attention to the world what's been taught in the Palestinian media and education system. As an Israeli diplomat, is Israel able to have any impact on leaders of the EU member states or the European Union to look at this issue of incitement? Because surely there can't be peace until the issue of incitement and incitement to violence and terrorism is actually stopped.
But unfortunately, the results, we are bringing it up each time with every leader, both in the European Parliament, on the level of the European Union member states. Unfortunately, the results are mixed because it depends on the leader himself or herself, and we are always emphasizing that they are using incitement, using the social media, like ISIS uses it, in order to poison the minds of young people. We see that most of the terror attacks were made by 13 years old, 15 years old, 16 years old men and women. So it's something that they are targeting. They are targeting the young minds of these of the Palestinians in order to tell them that it's okay to kill Jews, and we have to stop it. We raise it all the time. Unfortunately, in the EU and some of the member states, some of the leaders don't understand the gravity of this situation.
Yeah. And Jonathan, yesterday I saw a very shocking news report from Gaza in which there's a young men's fashion store in Gaza called Hitler 2, and the mannequins are dressed up in Palestinian Intifada clothing and all wearing knives. And it's been a part of a big publicity campaign in Gaza, particularly with Hamas. What is your reaction to the fact that in Gaza they've actually named a men's department store, fashion store, and call it Hitler?
It's something which every time we think that they surprise us with a new wave of extremism and extreme ideas, that they just stretch the line some more, and we see it unfortunately not only with this incident that you mentioned. We see it all the year. In the summer, when there's vacation in schools, they take the children to activities, paramilitary activities, telling them that it's okay to kill Jews. The Jews are the one at fault. You have to kill them. They took your land, and that's the message. This is their message, and they are giving them ammunition. They are giving them knives and guns in order to have exercise with it. And unfortunately, this is what we see each time, each year, every summer and every day.
Yeah. When you allow me, when it comes up in my mind, when Federica Mogherini, the High Representative, speaks about that she has concerns about all the victims, she makes a total mistake. Yeah. For on the Palestinian side, there are martyrs, shaheeds. So she studied political Islam. She has no idea, or she want to evade the issue of this Islamic background of all this violence. Mm-hmm. And that means he's totally dishonest on the real intentions and what's going on in the Middle East.
Yes, absolutely. And Thomas, isn't this actually core to the entire peace process, that if there is to be a genuine peace, then the issue of incitement and hatred, particularly on social media and the Palestinian education system, has to be addressed? And surely we can learn the lessons from Europe, and particularly Germany and Austria went through a period of Nazi Nazification programs. Isn't the same needed here within the Palestinian Authority?
I think it's very clear, just listening to Jonathan, and not only listening to Jonathan, but just going to social media, and each day you see the most horrendous expression exactly of this. Just to imagine that you can have YouTube videos where you show people how you use a knife, how you most effectively kill a person. I mean, it's almost like it's surrealistic. It's like outside of what we can comprehend, but. So I think also here there's a responsibility for companies like Google and Facebook, just as there are clear guidelines for, say, sexual content or pedophilic content. This should be a clear no. I mean, you cannot teach anyone to kill using a knife on a YouTube video. Someone is responsible, and someone needs to be made responsible for that content. So you're absolutely right, and I often refer to the peace process in Northern Ireland to say that it had to start with very clear money invested into peace education, and what we see in the Palestinian Authority is exactly the opposite to peace education. Respecting the other side, acknowledging the other side, and we are very far from that reality right now. So I think, as Bas would say, therefore it's so shocking to see people just repeating this mantra, two-state solution, it has to happen sooner rather than later, it should happen in a few weeks' time. It's so unrealistic, where our leaders should really look into the core of these issues, which is not happening now.
Exactly.
I'm an historian. It is erasing the Jewish roots of their being. So, and when you are growing up, when in the schools, it is taught that there are no Jewish traces at all.
Yeah.
It is all Islamic. Hey?
Yes. Yeah.
There's totally no recognition. How can you indeed speak about the recognition of the Jewish state?
Jonathan, I wonder if you can compare really and contrast the Israeli education system and how the Israeli government are preparing their people for peace with that of the Palestinian Authority, because I think the European Union and the European Commission need to know this.
Starting in kindergarten, the content is pro-peace, that you have to live in peace with your neighbor, that you have to strive to peace, that you have to give all that you can to live in peace. So that's the main message, that's the main focus of the activity from kindergarten to school. This is the main message. This is something that we are building our educational program around. On the other hand, on the other side, they are teaching them that the West Bank is not enough. You should think about Jaffa, you should think about Haifa, you should think about Tel Aviv, you should think about Beersheba, you should aspire to the whole land of Israel, to the whole Holy Land. So from our point of view, we think about compromise while they are thinking about how to achieve the maximum. So in this situation, it's very difficult to reach peace.
Yeah.
And Thomas, I mean, the very issue of Jerusalem is central to this, isn't it? Which is, you know, it is the sovereign capital of the Jewish people. And Israel, under Israeli sovereignty, Jerusalem has given freedom of worship to Christians, Jews and Muslims. Isn't there a great danger that Jerusalem is being used as a means to incite Palestinian violence against Israelis in what could be a third intifada?
Absolutely, and it's interesting again that this is something that we see history repeating itself. I was just reading recently about Jerusalem in the 1930s. When the Mufti at that time was coming out. Well, there was no social media, let's make that clear, in the 1930s, but still, you know, spreading these rumors to say that, you know, the Jews are trying to take over the Temple Mount completely and using that as inciting to violence. And we know some of the pogroms in the 1930s that came about because of that. So we see also here a pattern which we see repeated today and amplified, of course, with modern social media. And we would always make the point from European Coalition for Israel to say that, you know, listen, we have a clear choice. Do we want a future Jerusalem to look more like Mecca, or do we want the future Jerusalem to look more like Paris or Brussels or London? And I think the choices are very clear, and we don't have to sort of second guess if we take a certain path what it will look like. We already know what cities which are under Islam, how they relate to religious plurality and religious freedom. And it's crystal clear. We saw it before 1967 in Jerusalem. Do we want to go back to that? That Jews, to quote Abbas again, the filthy feet of Jews should not touch the Temple Mount, and that includes, of course, Christians as well. Are these the European values that we always talk about when we say we are sharing our values with Israel? I don't think so. So I think the issue of the future of Jerusalem, who can best guarantee that we maintain the delicate balance which is there today, but also a balance which respects universal freedoms. It's very clear. And therefore, I think the European Union, if we really care about these values, we should say loud and clear, Jerusalem should remain the capital, an undivided capital of Israel in the future.
Absolutely. And gentlemen, we've got less than 4 minutes of the programme, so I'm just going to ask you, Bas, what can our viewers do watching this programme? I mean, how important is it that they write to MEPs like you or their own representatives to say that we need to protect Jerusalem in particular, because it's such a holy city that if Jerusalem is lost, the West is lost effectively?
I stems from a Protestant church that is have a lot of love for the Jewish people. So it is quite clear, it is beyond any doubt that Jerusalem should be Jewish. And tomorrow I have a lecture at a church in my birthplace, Ridderkerk, and there is a strong affiliation. And I totally agree with, even if you are not religious like me, then with it should be common sense that there should be no change. Now, how much holy places have Islam already? So you shouldn't. It is, and also how they act with it. So it is. For me, therefore, for me, I'm always against any resolution in the Parliament that is promoting the division of Jerusalem. That is, for me, a red line, totally red line. And it is but it is such utter nonsense that is here on the table at the moment in the Parliament about, and also with Mogherini about the two-state solution and so on. They wanted to have a role in which drama?
No, absolutely, very good question. And Jonathan, what does Jerusalem mean to you as an Israeli diplomat and an Israeli?
Jerusalem is the heart. Is at the heart of each diplomat, Israeli diplomat. This is our unified capital, and we, from the beginning of the State of Israel, when it was divided, we already wanted and aspired to go back to the holy places. And of course, already when we were in the diaspora, we aspired to go back to Jerusalem and to see Jerusalem and pray in Jerusalem. This Jerusalem is always in our heart, and always in our prayers, especially in the Passover prayer. So it's always there, and it hurts us a lot to see what's going on in Jerusalem and to see these riots happening in a holy place that's supposed to be a place of worship and prayer and a direct contact, let's say, with God. And instead of it, people bring their rocks and fireworks and start violence. So for us, it hurts us a lot.
And Jonathan, for Jerusalem's sake, we won't keep quiet. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me on today's European Report. I just want to thank you all for watching today's programme. What we're seeing clearly from the Palestinian Authority is nothing but state-sanctioned child abuse by allowing the incitement and hatred to be filled with children and young people to incite violence and terrorism against Israel and against Jews in particular. And there can be no solution to this conflict unless this issue of incitement is dealt with. Also, we have to recognise that Jerusalem under Israeli sovereignty has guaranteed religious freedom to Christians, Jews and Muslims, and so therefore the status quo should continue. So let's continue to pray for the peace and security of Jerusalem. So thank you for watching today's European Report.